Hi, everybody. This is Saad, another fantastic guest today. I have for you Professor Amy Wax from the University of Pennsylvania Law School. How you doing, Amy?
Okay.
Well, I wanted to first, give some details about your educational background because it is quite unique. Uh, you seem to have collected degrees from every possible Ivy League
Yes.
school. Uh, so you began with I'm going off memory here, but I've got my notes in case I draw a blank. You began with a
Right.
bachelor's degree in biophysics and biochemistry at Yale. Then you went on um, to do I guess, a scholarship at Oxford, where you studied the three P's: philosophy, physiology, and psychology. And then you went and did an MD degree at Harvard, so another Ivy League school. Then you got a residency in neurology at my alma mater, or at least the hospital associated with it, Cornell University. And then you decided, I'm going to practice neurology. Then you left neurology and then got a law degree at Columbia University. So my first question would be, what caused you to leave neurology and go into the law?
Well, I probably should have left earlier. I think when I was a science major in college and I love science. And as a I don't know if you know Yuval Levin, but he said to me once a nice Jewish girl tells her parents she's going to be a doctor, you can't take it back. So I decided to go to medical school, and I realized that I was radically temperamentally unsuited to the practice of medicine, but it took me about 8 years to really just act on that, and finally leave medicine. And it was nothing sort of elevated or complicated. It was really very particular to me. I just realized fairly gradually, although gradually and then all of a sudden, that I didn't enjoy dealing with sick people. I really was something of a loner and an introvert. I was intellectual in a way that law appealed to. It was just all these little things. And I drifted away from medicine. And then I got a good clerkship. I got a great job at the Justice Department in the Reagan and Bush administrations in something called the Solicitor General's office, which is the best job you could possibly have, representing the United States before the Supreme Court. So there was really very little motivation for me to go back to medicine. My husband is a professor of medicine at Penn, and so and an oncologist. I live vicariously, I guess you could say, through him. But my experience, I think, has really helped me advise young people because I do meet young people who can't decide whether to go in the law direction or the medicine direction. And I always tell them this is not a decision you make based on these abstract, highfalutin ideas about what's worthwhile and what isn't. It's a decision you make that comes from knowing yourself. Know thyself, the
Right.
hardest thing you could possibly do.
Well,
I,
I mean, the reason why I thought it was interesting to ask you the question, other than, it's an interesting pivot, it's because in my next book, I have a chapter where I talk about the psychology of regret. And basically, the psychology of regret involves two types of regrets: regret due to action and regret due to inaction. And
yeah.
most people experience the greatest form of regret from their inactions. I became a chartered accountant because my dad was a chartered accountant, but I always wanted to be a painter. And now I'm 65. I regret so much that I didn't pursue my passion. So in a sense, you had the courage to decide, I'm ready to pivot, which many people don't have that courage, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was hardly, super courageous to go into a very established kind of conventional profession. I wasn't taking a huge risk,
But you're
but
leaving many years of sunk
I
costs.
did. Yeah, sunk costs, right. Well, I hadn't even learned sort of how utterly awful the sunk cost fallacy is yet, and yet I left the sunk cost. And there were costs to that. I did, I think, puzzle my parents, maybe even disappoint them, and I was a pretty dutiful daughter. It meant that I started my law career pretty late. I think I have no regrets about the course that I took, but the one thing I do regret is that I had children. I started having children very late. Now, luckily, I was able to have three, so I feel very fortunate in that. as many women who started at 38 as I did are not able to. But if I had to do over again, I would have had children much younger.
I actually share that regret because my wife and I have been together for 22 plus years. And by choice, we decided to only have our first child. We have two children, uh, 13 years ago. And in retrospect, I would have liked these two children to be numbers 3 and 4 rather than number 1 and 2.
Right.
And I guess the second parental regret that I have, which you probably don't unless you're a multilingual person, is that between my wife and I, we speak 5 languages, and yet our children only speak French and English. So the Arabic is lost, the Hebrew is lost, and the Armenian is lost.
Oh,
And I deeply regret that.
well, at least they don't barely speak one, which is sometimes I think of my children. No, that's a joke at their expense. But what's curious is the demographic trends, which are declining birth rates, precipitously declining, and especially among the hyper-educated women that I teach and deal with, are to me very disconcerting and puzzling. I try to tell my students, very few women can get to the end of their life childless without regret. I mean, that's an old-fashioned, hoary way of thinking about things, I know.
Okay, we just added another line of controversy
Topic,
from a
I know.
podcast. Thank you, Amy.
But they just don't seem to affect that insight because radical feminism, right, has gotten to their brain. It's your brain on radical feminism. And
Idea pathogens right here in this book.
yeah, trying to counter that is not easy
Right.
at all. So that's part of what's going on today.
Okay, let's before we get into some of the stuff that's triggered the ire against you and so on. I was going through your CV, and I was so excited to see that you have an interest in the intersection between evolutionary psychology and the law. This is
Yes.
something that very few, whether it be professors of law or practicing lawyers, would know of. It's something that I'm very well aware of because my area of research is linking evolutionary psychology to everything, including to consumer behavior and behavioral decision making. So I'm very familiar, for example, with the Grutter Institute, with Owen Jones, who's a Vanderbilt professor. I don't know if you know. Do you know Owen Jones?
I know him very well because I was in the MacArthur Project on law and neuroscience.
Okay,
And
so tell us about your
I
interest.
know
Tell us
him
what
well.
that intersection is, because it's fantastic. Go ahead.
Well, I mean, I think the insights that evolutionary science or psychology brings to law and to really any study of human behavior and human nature. I mean, it's so much bigger than law. Law is just kind of one portion of it, right? Are in some ways sounder than a lot of the extrapolation that I'm seeing from neuroscience to law, because my years of experience in the MacArthur Project, and then I also teach a course on law and neuroscience, have made me very skeptical that neuroscience, properly understood on the micro level, or even, on the brain imaging level, or brain function level, has a lot to teach us about how people behave, or how we ought to structure the law or whatever. So I consider that a completely separate question from the insights of evolutionary psychology. And, there I've always had an interest, and I've always thought that evolution taught us something, although we have to be very careful because we're very complex creatures and culture is powerful. I mean, it really is quite powerful, even in drawing us away from our propensities, our inclinations, our impulses, right, to the point where we sometimes just completely run contrary to them. But there still remain areas where evolution really has something to teach us. So I'll give you an example. I just gave a talk. One of my areas of interest is, family demographics. And family demographics is incredibly important to poverty, to deprivation, to disadvantage, but also to the future of civilization. And one of the trends we're seeing is that men are avoiding college, withdrawing from higher education. Higher education has become feminized. which I think is a dire trend on multiple levels. But one of the ways in which it's become feminized is that there are more women than men in most universities, except at the very top, which have the pick of the litter, right? And what does that mean? I think it has catastrophic consequences for women's happiness because women are hypergamous. They are stubbornly hypergamous. You know, gender may be constructed and gender preferences may be malleable, but that one has resisted all attempts to change it.
And if I forgive me for interrupting you, and the higher the status of a woman, the more she insists on a man who is of equal or higher status. So it's not a question of women desire status because they've been locked out of the the resource game. If you take Oprah, she will be even more insistent on a super high status guy, right?
Right. Well, I mean, women just don't seem to think it's enough for them to be high status. They want a partner who's also high status, equal or higher status. But I think there's something else going on, which is the higher up you go, the harder it is to find someone who's equal or higher status. And, you know, that becomes a rare avis. And now that men are withdrawing from higher education, it's even harder. I often tell people the future is feline. It's going to be a great era for cat ladies, let me tell you.
Oh, here's another controversial
It'll be
comment.
great to be a cat. It will be great to be a cat. Uh, so, you know, how do we solve that kind of problem? We can try to manipulate women's preferences. They're very, very perdurable. I think the best way is to try to bring men back into higher education. Well, now Scott Yaner got into trouble by saying that at the National Conservatism Convention. He's now being investigated under Title IX. He's a professor at Boise State, who's affiliated with the Claremont Institute. He said we need to stop pushing women into the professions, into STEM fields, into higher education, because they already numerically dominate, and we need to bring back more balance. You know, if we want strong families to form, if we want harmonious relationships to form, that strikes me as a more feasible way of doing it. Now, of course, why are men abandoning higher education? Why are men refusing to go to college? Well, that's the other aspect of feminization. It's because the radical feminist ideology has infused all of higher education, right? Maleness is suspect. The patriarchy is evil. Men's strengths, men's preferences, men's contributions, these are all suspect. These are all to be denigrated and purged. We have to bring women's preferences to the fore. And I think a lot of the crisis of wokeism on campus is due to the abandonment of traditionally male perspectives and prerogatives, which have fueled and dominated higher education and all intellectual endeavors for centuries, and I think rightly so. I wouldn't see them as male. I kind of see them as universal, but it's men that have devised them, propagated them, preserved them, right? These all have to go. Objectivity, logic, argument, evidence, all that stuff, in favor of the feminine values of care, of feelings, and then, of course, the vacuum that's created is filled by power, ironically enough. So I think that's what we're seeing in higher education today, and it's pernicious, it's terrible, it's destructive. And the thing is, the admission of women to colleges and graduate programs didn't have to end that way. We could have admitted women, which, you know, fairness requires that we open channels of opportunity to women. Although I will say that, you know, the crusty old patriarchs of old, in being reluctant to do that, they were kind of onto something, unfortunately. But now we have women very present in higher ed. But that didn't have to entail adopting female priorities. And for people who say, oh, you know, it's false that men and women think differently about what's important and what's less important. Well, there's survey data, abundant survey data now, that shows that if you ask women versus men, elite educated women, what's more important? Truth seeking, advancing the frontiers of knowledge, um, innovating and creating new knowledge, or being nice, cosseting people's emotional traumas, all of those kind of values of emotional well being and care, they will 2 to 1 tell you it's the latter, not the former, whereas men give you the very opposite pattern,
So let
right?
me
Are the
one
free speech champions.
Sure. So there are a lot of stuff I want to address. So number one, regarding your point about truth seeking versus playing nice, I was told by a senior administrator at my university that despite, forgive the immodesty, all of my accomplishments, the fact that when I address someone on Twitter in a Twitter brawl by calling them imbecile, that negates all of my accomplishments. So the mere fact that I wasn't playing super diplomatic with someone who had repeatedly insulted me on Twitter and called them an imbecile, that is way more important than a 50-page academic CV. So that speaks to your point.
It does.
Number two,
The person who insulted you. I'm going to turn down the heat because it's very noisy here. Just a second.
okay.
Um, yeah, well, right. So, I mean, I'm not a proponent of name calling at all, and I think we should try to stay on the merits. But the very idea of staying on the merits is actually, disfavored.
Yes.
If the merits of the argument are unpleasant or unwelcome or make people feel undesired, or, so for example, any debate about group differences absolutely is forbidden, practically forbidden now. And I think there's been a real sea change in that, even over the past 15, 20 years, because someone might feel hurt or insulted or, less good at something than someone else. And that's just totally unacceptable. But think about that taboo, the extent of that taboo. I mean, it extends into all the human sciences. It's kind of a poison that invades all of social science, much of the hard sciences, certainly the biological sciences, human genetics, human developmental studies. I mean, there's no field that isn't distorted by those, priorities, which really don't belong in a university, in my humble opinion. I mean, there is a place for an ethic of care, and concern about people's psychological well-being and all that sort of stuff, but it's not in a university. I'm sorry. That's a
Right.
total perversion.
So let me link back to evolutionary psychology and your discussion of feminism, and then link it back to law. I want to say a few things. So any evolutionary psychologist understands that we are a sexually dimorphic species, which basically means
Right.
that there are many things on which men and women are exactly similar to one another, but there are many things on which we would have necessitated sex-specific differences, whether it be in our traits, in our morphology, in our personalities, in our temperaments, in our preferences. So it is literally anti-science to presume that men and women should be indistinguishable in their preferences. So the same group of folks who from this side of their mouths talk about being pro-science will be the exact manifestations of those who are violating the most fundamental scientific edicts when it comes to the recognition that men and women do have sex-specific differences. So that itself is hallucinatory to me.
Right. I mean, Jonathan Haidt sort of made that point that, the left has these massive blind spots when it comes to science, and that's one of them.
Yeah, exactly. Now, in terms of the link between EP, evolutionary psychology, and the law, I think earlier today I sent you a clip. I'm not sure if you had a chance to look at it. In my first book ever, in chapter 1, I have a whole section on Hammurabi's code, which I believe is a code that even predates the Mosaic code. And so I took specific codes from his Hammurabi code, and I demonstrated how they are perfectly aligned with basic evolutionary principles. For example, it might be related to paternity uncertainty or the thwarting of, and so to me, it seems incredible that you could study anything involving biological agents, whether it be consumer behavior or the law, bereft of an understanding of our shared biological heritage. So what is it that has stopped legal scholars for so many centuries to develop, to erect their codes without an understanding of our evolved nature?
Well, I mean, there are a lot of things. First of all, the whole idea that there is a human nature that sets limits on what sorts of societies you can have, or how society can be organized, or what you can expect from people, from groups, from families, and from men and women is antithetical to a certain postmodernist mindset, which I would trace back to Rousseau, but there are other thinkers who have adopted this point of view, which is that man is born free, and as a corollary, born with infinite possibilities for progress, for change, for crafting society and crafting the individual personality, right? And yet he is in chains. And what puts him in chains? Well, I mean, tradition, the recognition of limits, notions that there's human nature and there's a point beyond which we just can't fruitfully counter that human nature and the like. I mean, people want to believe that there are no limits, right? And they want to believe that we can socially engineer the perfect society. So a lot of it has to do with this kind of very American spirit of progressivism, of infinite improvement, which has its virtues, but as George Will says, the essence of conservative thought is up to a point. So the virtues only go up to a point. So now that this whole mindset has been adopted by the left, right? That any talk of human nature, any talk of genetically grounded differences, any talk of male-female differences, of group differences, this is unacceptable. This is fascistic. This is backward and reactionary. And it's just a cover for the oppressor and the people already privileged and in power to persecute people who have no power. So once again, it kind of comes back to these power politics. And, I find it very hard to understand, because I don't really see it or feel it, why women feel that it's necessary to insist that men and women are the same and equal in everything. I mean, I was just saying to a friend the other day, I do not lose sleep over the fact that 20% of the Harvard physics department is men. I mean, why is this something that, is a grievous insult or outrage to me? If I want to be a physicist and I have the talent and the ability and the interest, I don't see anybody stopping me. I see the channels of opportunity as open. And it's kind of ironic, and it doesn't matter how many women there are in a particular field or not, because individualism here should take over. Each of us should go as far as we can based on its own merits, on our own merits. And it's ironic, because going back to what Yuval Levin said to me about being a doctor, when I was an adolescent, and that was a while ago, it was late 60s, and I was good in science and math, nobody discouraged me. Quite the opposite. People were constantly pushing me to go into those fields, encouraging me, urging me to go into those fields. But I recognized that, I had other interests, and I kind of had this inkling that eventually I probably wouldn't end up in those fields. And this comports with David Lubinsky's work. I don't know if you know his work, but he has a series of papers. He's a professor, I think, at Vanderbilt, a series of papers where he looks at highly gifted pre-adolescents and adolescents, men and women. And what he shows is that net of cognitive ability, so setting aside the sort of Larry Summers question of whether men and women differ in cognitive ability, which, I think there is some evidence for. I know that's a heretical thought. But just controlling for that, Lubinsky found that men and women with equal degrees of talent have very different preferences about the kind of life that they want to lead, the balance between work and family, nurturing and care related values versus, things, people versus things, how much they want to work, how many hours they want to work, what their goals are. I mean, there are all sorts of parameters in which men and women differ. And I don't understand why we don't accept those. What's wrong with that?
Can I offer some possible explanations,
Sure.
which I cover in my last book? So in my book, in the Parasitic Mind, I argue that all of the idea pathogens, postmodernism, militant feminism, social constructivism, cultural
Pathogen.
relativism, each of those idea pathogens shares one thing in common. They wish to free us from the pesky shackles of reality in order to pursue some noble goal, right? So in the case, for example, of social constructivism, the tabula rasa premise, every child can be the next Michael Jordan if only you hug them enough or don't hug them enough. That is a very hopeful message. It makes me feel good that my child has equal potentiality to every other child. Now, it is perfectly rooted in bullshit, but my God, does it feel good? It just feels right. It liberates me from the shackles of reality. Therefore, each of the folks who promulgate these idea pathogens are consequentialists when it comes to the truth. They're not deontological, right? If I need to murder truth in the service of a higher noble goal, so be it. So that's what happens with militant feminists, I argue, right? They need to squash the sexist patriarchy, the status quo. And as long as we admit that there are evolved sex differences between the two sexes, that hinders my ability to squash the patriarchy. Therefore, I will be a consequentialist. I will put on my hat of a consequentialist, and I will strongly condemn anyone who says that men and women might start with different biological imperatives. What do you think of that explanation?
Well, I think I agree with that. I mean, I was talking before about, the romance of social engineering and limitless possibilities. And I think what you're really doing is agreeing with me on this, that people are very attached to this idea that there are limitless possibilities, that you can be anything you want to be, which, you can be Mozart, you could be, I mean, people actually say these things. It's totally bizarre. And one of the paradoxes, well, there are a couple of things about it that's disturbing. One is when you deal with, elite coastal populations, which, I do because of where I've been and where I am, you recognize that they mouth this stuff, but on the ground, you know, they don't really believe it. When you ask them about their own kids, can little Aiden, be Mozart? I mean, they don't really they don't think so. They know that he can't, right? They know that he's born with a certain personality and a certain nature, and they know the same thing about little Emma as well. But when they get out of the realm of the personal into the theoretical, uh, they seem to forget all of these down to earth insights and spout, all this nonsense. Now, that would just be kind of a set of cute delusions, right? But the problem is, in the current era, this set of cute delusions has turned really nasty and really destructive, really on a number of levels. The first is it is in the process of destroying academia, really, and a set of institutions which are the glory of Western civilization, if I may say so, which have taken hundreds of years to develop, have come out of these hard-won traditions of thought that banished, superstition and irrationality and, prejudice in the deep sense. I mean, not in the Burkean sense of, these preferences that society needs to run, but benighted superstitions. It's taken us a very long time to get there. And now these people are trying to bomb us back from the first world to the third world, quite literally, in the way we think, just as they're trying to do that for society as a whole, quite frankly, on many levels and in many spheres. But the second is, it is really interfering with relationships between men and women. it is producing, I think, a tremendous amount of unhappiness, difficulty, loneliness, disharmony between men and women, and making it just a lot harder for them to get along. And there are many aspects to this. I mean, one of the aspects, one is the hostility that women are taught towards everything male, the lack of appreciation of everything male. And I'll tell you, if you want to, be censured, just try saying that men, are the authors of civilization. Just try taking the Camille Paglia line, which is whether you like it or not. Oh, my picture just disappeared here. I'm sorry.
I can see
If
it.
you like it or not, uh, men, have created science, technology, finance, uh, democracy, at pretty much everything you can think of. And if you doubt that, then look at Charles Murray's book, Human Accomplishment, which is a book that's been virtually ignored.
He was on my show very recently, Amy.
Yeah, but that's one of his books that's my favorite.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Nobody ever talks about it because it has these incredibly lopsided tables and charts about, which cultures created modernity and which gender created modernity, right? So women are never allowed to admire and look up to men and what they've done. Uh, you're not allowed to praise Western civilization. You're not allowed to be proud of it. That's chauvinism. If you look up chauvinism in the dictionary, excessive pride. I don't think that, it's hard to be excessively proud of a set of traditions that pulled away from the rest and generated all the good things in life, or most of them. Obviously, we borrowed and took from other cultures, but for reasons that aren't completely understood, we pulled ahead. So the denigration, the systematic denigration of what we've achieved, I think is dangerous. Because if you're not grateful for and you don't appreciate what you have, you will not preserve, protect, and defend it. And if we don't preserve, protect, and defend it, we will lose it.
Yeah.
And children will be worse off.
As you probably know, because I think we're on a common email list, if nothing else, you probably heard that a good friend of mine, Jordan Peterson, has recently
Yes.
retired. And I'm a few years younger than him. And I look, to be a professor is in my DNA, as I'm sure it is in yours. I could never imagine being anything else, but it's becoming so difficult to be a professor in the current ecosystem that even someone like me who would have never imagined uttering the following words, which is, you know what, I think I'm thinking of leaving, is a thought that constantly, it's one of those recurring sort of OCD thoughts, those ruminative thoughts, because
Yeah.
I am finding it terribly burdensome to be an academic these days. And so it's a tragedy, right? Because you have folks who are really committed to contributing to academia, who, never mind guys like us who have been around for a while, but I get thousands of emails from people who are hoping to enter academia, and then they say, based on seeing the things that you've written, Professor Saad, and all the wokeness and so on, I'm looking for another trajectory for my occupation. What a
Mhm.
tragedy, Amy, no?
No, that I think is a different thing. I mean, there are really two things going on here. One is those of us who are, reaching more the end of our career. I mean, I'm pushing 70 and I did hope to stay on for much longer. We, every day think, oh my gosh, why do I put up with this? It is so awful, right? What's
But why do
going
you? Tell us,
Oh,
why
well,
is
I
it?
have my reasons. I mean, several reasons. I mean, first of all, they've been trying to fire me for years, and they're still trying. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction, right? No, no, no. The second is, I'm just a shtetl girl. I come from a barely middle class family. And for me to have worked so hard to be earning the money that I do and have the position that I have and things like library privileges, which sounds silly, but it means a lot to me. I am not going to give that up without a fight. And this is just nuts and bolts. I've worked too hard to get where I am. Why would I give it up? But the third reason I stay, even though I'm treated like a pariah, I mean, I'm just treated really badly. Let me just say that. But I have a high tolerance for pain. Is I am literally, and I am told this by my students, the only person left on my faculty that the students who are not with the Wokatariat program can talk to and go to for advice. They do not trust any other professors, even though they pretend to, right? And I don't blame them for that. I don't blame them for trying to get along with their professors and, go with the, be nice to them and pretend that they are trustworthy. They are terrified of their fellow students, of the lefty professors, and that's, 98% of them, of the DIE establishment, this monstrosity. I mean, this hideous monstrosity, the diversity, inclusion, and equity bureaucracy, which is filled with mediocrities. People who don't care about truth seeking, don't care about academic values, couldn't be scholars if their life depended on it, are just kind of time-serving true believer bureaucrats.
Right.
It's welfare for the, for the barely educated upper middle class. Really, that is what DIE is. Okay, but they're always looking for something to do. They're always looking for some crisis or some evidence of discrimination or racism or something. I mean, my case at Penn, my awfulness, the terrible things I've said, they're like pigs in shit. I am sure that they're having meeting after meeting. They drink tons of coffee. They might even bring some Danish in from a local emporium. I don't know. What should we do about Amy Wax? They're busy. It keeps them busy. I mean, I don't know. So I feel like I would be abandoning my students, the ones, who take my conservative thought class, the ones who are not with the program, the ones in the Federalist Society. And I'm just, not going to do that. And that's why I stay. Now, the other problem you alluded to, and one that grieves me greatly, because I have a son who's actually a PhD candidate in economics, and I think would dearly love to be in academia, and he's very, very bright and deserves to be. He has a lot of friends from college who are in PhD programs of various kinds, very brilliant, mostly guys, in government, in social science, in STEM fields, who are all in the same boat, right? They're all looking at, and many of them are right of center, secretly so.
Right. I think many of them have probably written me emails.
Yeah, they've written you, they've written me, and they are going to be really screwed. All right, they are going to be shut out. And the law, Jordan Peterson alludes to this. He alludes to it in STEM, but I think it's true in social science. I think it's true in history. I think it's true in a whole variety of fields. These are the best and the brightest, and these are the people who will be prolific, because we know that male scholars are more prolific than women, and write the big books and all of this sort of thing. And are these people even ever going to get hired? Are they ever going to get positions? We are going to lose a whole generation of first-rate scholars, and I feel horribly sorry for these people. If they want to go into academia, they have to play let's pretend with this whole fealty to the DIE gods, the diversity, inclusion, and equity gods, right? Or they don't have a snowball's chance in hell of surviving and getting tenure. And even when you get tenure, because I have tenure, there are a million little and big ways that they can make life miserable for you if you step out of line and say things that are unapproved. So, I don't know what to do about that. I really don't. But it is a terrible shame. Now, I did have dinner with a famous person who will go nameless, and I asked him, I said, don't the upper middle class white people and Asians also, don't they realize that this is just really bad for their children, and especially their sons? that they're, this woke ideology, which is everywhere, is going to hurt their own kids. Do they not care? Uh, and we had no, I mean, I had no answer to that. He seemed to think the thing that would hurt the Democrats the most in the coming elections is the crime surge, the wildly out of control crime surge. But actually, I don't think so, because if you look at Charles Murray's Coming Apart, what you learn, and that's a magisterial book, is that, upper middle class whites have kind of segregated themselves, barricaded themselves in these whitopian neighborhoods. They're totally geographically isolated and protected. They're culturally protected, institutionally. They live a separate life from, the rank and file, the unwashed masses, and they're fine with that. But I think it's all going to come crashing down when they realize that the universities have just, in some ways, turned against them.
Yeah, I hear you. Speaking of, when you mentioned earlier that the pen has been trying to fire you, I thought we would spend a few minutes drilling down some of the quote controversial comments. So let me kind of summarize them, and then you'll come in and clean up anything that I might have gotten wrong. So I took note of three cases. One where you were pointing to the fact that just in terms of the great distribution facts, you were arguing that Black students were less likely in your law classes to score in the top quartile of students. That was one statement that got you into trouble. A second one related to the fact that when Asian immigrants come, they tend to vote for Democrats, and so maybe we need to curtail Asian immigration. And then the third one was the one that I think is the least quote controversial, is when you basically argue that not all cultures are equal. Now, before I ask you to weigh in on these three statements, let me just mention one or 2 points. I think perhaps the third statement is the one that many people would find less controversial, because it is a state, or maybe I'm wrong, but at least for me, it would be less controversial. Because pragmatically speaking, just let me make the point and then you can have at it. Because pragmatically speaking, you're not identifying anyone, yet making a profound point. All cultures are not equal, and that is as clear as the existence of gravity or the sun. I've made that point 13 million times, and I never got into trouble. I probably say things that are a lot more controversial than anything you've ever said, and I don't get into trouble. Now, it could be because of my intoxicating good looks, but it could also be because by me pragmatically not pointing to a particular group, not because I'm afraid to do so, but because I can make the argument in the abstract, it allows me to then have kind of an austere position or a veneer, a true veneer of objectivity. So do you think that maybe that's what got you into hot water, the fact that you are pointing to specific groups, even though epidemiologically speaking, that statement might be true, the fact that you point to the group rather than speak in the abstract causes people to trigger their ire? Does that make sense?
Well, I mean, let me just say a few things. Let's start with that observation. I think there really is something to that observation, in that I tend to be blunt and I tend to be concrete and specific. I actually am very mistrustful of abstractions. And I think one of the generic frustrations of, the whole conservative movement in the United States, and if you read, the Claremont Review of Books, if you read their outlets, there's a lot of highfalutin abstract talk. They never sort of get down and dirty because they don't want to get down and dirty. And when it comes to race, they're terrified. All right. I mean, they just, one of their real Achilles heels on racism, on structural racism, is they're not willing to say, no, groups have different levels of ability, demonstrated ability, different competencies, that they, you just don't say that. And even conservatives are afraid to say that and point to particular groups, particular data. I mean, sort of like Charles Murray does in Facing Reality, which I'm actually at the moment reviewing, about to publish a review of. And he does get down and dirty, but then at the end, in his last chapter, he kind of pulls back. And he never says what I think he needs to say, which is, and now, given the realities of different rates of crime, different average IQs, uh, people have to accept without apology that blacks are not going to be evenly distributed through all occupations. They're just not. And that's not a problem. That's not due to racism. That's due to these differences, which, although we don't completely understand them, we've tried for ages to change them and we haven't succeeded. But, who's willing to say that? So that's the kind of thing that gets you in trouble. But let me just say that the first two that you cited, there was kind of a media storm about them, but one frustrating aspect is that they were taken completely out of context. What the media does is it hones in on these sound bites, just yanks them from the more broader, more nuanced discussion, and then just propagates them like tea table gossip, to the point where people don't even know the source of it or what you actually said or what you were actually arguing or anything like that. They're just out there to lynch you, basically. They just get a thrill out of it. And I think that's partly what's going on. The blacks, tend to not be well represented at the top of the class. Gad, anybody who teaches law school knows this to be true, okay? Richard Sander at UCLA documented this 20 years ago when he got his hands on a database. I mean, I want you to find a law professor who can honestly, of course, you'll find people who lie, look you in the eye and say, in my law school, top law school, which of course practices heavy affirmative action, blacks are evenly distributed throughout the class, top, middle, and bottom. Because it just ain't so. I have a friend who recently told me a funny anecdote. He's a law professor who, of course, will go nameless. And he dated a woman who said, oh, they started talking about Penn for some reason. He's not a Penn professor. And he said, she said, Penn's a great school, but it has this crazy professor, Amy Wax, who dared to say that blacks do less well in law school than other people. And he looked at her and he said, but what she said is absolutely true. Wait, this was their last date. He said, but what she said is not false. And everybody knows that. And this guy is like not a radical. Okay. So it's just duplicity in its purest form. Right? And of course, they won't release the data. They won't get an independent auditor to actually look at it. They just say I'm lying, but I'm not.
So what do you think? So let me give you a story, a personal story that speaks to some of these group differences. Now one can debate. And by the way, when I was asking you originally the question, I was playing devil's advocate. It's not at all that I
Oh,
don't
it's
believe.
fine. I no problem.
Because believe me, I say every possible uncomfortable truth that is imaginable. Try saying something against Islam and see how that works out. So
Well, right.
it's not my colleagues that come after me. I get death threats. So I understand it. When it comes to truth, you have to be deontological. And so I certainly admire you for that. Do you, so let me first tell you that my personal story, and then we can tease out whether it's due to something endemic to the culture or something more dispositional to the individual, to the race. So when I finished, so I did an undergrad in math and computer science, then I did an MBA. Then eventually I went on and did my MS and PhD at Cornell. But after my MBA, one of my brothers, who at the time lived in Southern California, was really keen on having me work with him for a few years before I went on for my other degrees. I always knew that I wanted to be in academia, but he was keen on sort of having me put on the proverbial suit, getting some experience, hanging out with him, working with him. And so he was trying to convince me to take a break before I would go on for my PhD. And so I humored him and listened to his arguments, although it was never going to be that I wasn't going to pursue my PhD. When my mother caught wind of the fact that my brother was trying to potentially convince me to put my PhD on hold, and I returned to Montreal, I had visited him in Southern California, she took me to a side room, as if she's about to tell me this deep, dark secret, and said, Gad, I heard that David is trying to convince you not to do your PhD. Do you want for people to know you as someone who dropped out of school? So my mother thought we're Lebanese Jews, in case you didn't know. So the level of excellence that is expected is such that if I had dropped out, put on hold after an MBA with a bachelor's in mathematics and computer science at a leading global university, that would bring shame to the family because I would be a dropout, right? Now, of course, I didn't pursue my PhD to please my mother, but it gives you a sense of the culture that is inculcated within you in terms of what is expected of you to be a successful member of society. So do you think that what might drive some of these cultural differences that you speak of, these types of dynamics, or do you think there is something endemic to the races in the same way that some races are taller than others that might result in these outcome-based realities?
Well, I'm not, I am not a human geneticist and I don't play one on TV. Now, I do follow the literature because I'm quite curious about it. It's a scientific literature that's quite fascinating. So I think I'm pretty well informed in it. I think I'm pretty well informed in psychometrics. I've been to the ISIR meetings, International Society for Intelligence Research. I know people in the field. I've always told people that I think the data on, nature versus nurture and the degree to which each influences these patterns is inconclusive. And I think it is inconclusive, absolutely. Now that in itself is heresy, right? Because anybody who thinks it might be possible that there's an innate contribution to these group differences
As a
is
Nazi.
is a Nazi. Yes, thank you. Is a Nazi and should be drummed out of polite society. Well, should certainly be drummed out of academia, but further polite society. But frankly, there's a sort of secret society of psychometricians who agree with me, and even think that the evidence is, starting to get pretty strong, that there is an innate contribution. So let's talk about something a little less incendiary than race, which is Ashkenazi Jews,
Yeah.
right? Now, if you honestly believe that the, 15 or 12 point higher average Ashkenazi Jewish IQ is totally cultural, I have a bridge that I can sell you. All right. It just defies the evidence.
As a Mizrahi Jew, I feel marginalized by your comment.
Why? Well, I mean, I'm not in the weeds on Ashkenazi versus, Sephardic and all of this, but I do know people like Razib Khan and others have
Yes.
looked at the founding mothers, the bottlenecks, the genetic closeness of Ashkenazi Jews. I mean, they are incredibly genetically uniform. Of course, now we're diluting our brand like crazy because we're intermarrying and
Diluting the brand, I like that.
don't go to medical school anymore. They make films. I don't know what they're doing. I honestly don't. But things are not what they used to be, which shows you that culture is powerful,
Right.
right? So now Jews are diluting their brand. They're in eclipse. They've kind of lost the mojo and all of this. And yet, when I think of my past students, oh boy, there were some very smart Jews there, let me tell you. But that's not systematic in any way. So, but I don't like lose sleep at night over the fact that there might be an innate component to this stuff. I mean, I don't lose sleep over the fact that there's an innate component between men and women either. But for some reason, people just get incredibly outraged and exercised at the very possibility. And you can see why, because, well, when it comes to Ashkenazi Jews, they have used the meritocracy very much to their advantage, and they are very present in all of the opinion shaping institutions and roles. And, frankly, they haven't always used that influence to good, in my opinion. So there's an upside and a downside to some of this, right? And then, Asians have about a 5 or 6 point advantage on whites. We don't know what the source of that is. how much is culture, how much is genetics. But I will tell you this, there is such suspiciousness now directed at these human genetic population studies, these GWAS studies, especially in sensitive areas like, behavior, cognitive ability, certain personality traits like discount rate and executive function that matter to performance, that I think it's going to be very hard to sort this stuff out and do this research
Well,
in the future.
what's amazing to me is that what I call progressive epistemology, contrary to say the scientific method, progressive epistemology judges the veracity of a scientific finding based on whether it adheres to the orthodoxy, to political correctness or
Right.
not, right? So if I do a study on sex differences that show that women come out superior, whatever that means, on a memory location task, which women have been repeatedly shown to perform better than men, well, then I'm hailed. Oh, congratulations, Dr. Saad. What a brilliant scientist you are. If I were to show data that shows that all other things equal, men are much more likely to seek sexual variety seeking. Boo, boo, Nazi. What a Nazi. What a quack pseudoscientist. So therefore, my scientific robustness is not determined by whether I followed the tenets of the scientific method or I had methodological rigor. It's whether my results came out in line with the proper expected orthodoxy or not. Nothing could be more dangerous to truth seeking than to adopt such a progressive epistemology. I mean, it's the death of truth if you do that.
Right. And here's the thing. I mean, the notion that men seek more sexual variety than women is just, the hoariest insight that ever existed, and continues to be true. But it's now spread like kudzu to every corner of the human sciences. I mean, bias research, gender research, developmental research, anything having to do with disadvantage. I mean, every single area is now tainted by this imperative to get the right results. And I had a friend who's a distinguished behavioral geneticist tell me, this was a couple of years ago, that if she found a result that showed something that was against the orthodoxy for group differences, she wouldn't publish it. She wouldn't let it see the light of day. And I said to her, well, why are you in this field then? I mean, why don't you quit and become a stockbroker or something?
Well, and
I,
it's fraudulent, right? I mean, what
I,
she's doing is fraudulent, right?
well, it's scary. Yeah. It distorts it distorts and twists these areas, and they're all now politicized. They're all messed up. You have to be within the Overton window. I mean, I could give you a million examples. I just saw a study the other day about bias and the way that people, regard black versus white team members, and they're biased. Well, they come with presumptions that are based on valid differences that they observe in groups. That's the other thing, is people are willfully refusing to recognize that there is a difference between statistical patterns and how we regard and treat individuals. I mean, we should have totally different attitudes towards the two, right? And we need to keep that straight. But unfortunately, everything is taken personally, right? Anything about overall patterns that's adverse or insulting is taken as a personal insult, and therefore it's banned. So I just think all the human sciences are contaminated. And when I talk to young people, I just talked to a young PhD candidate, and I said it must be really difficult operating in your field,
Yeah.
because you always have to be looking over your shoulder, worrying that your findings will not be the approved findings. And I just don't understand. So it means that they stay away from certain areas, they stay away from certain databases. Uh, it just becomes more and more constricted.
Do you hold out? I have a couple of more questions for you, and then I've taken
Yeah.
enough of your time. I could keep you here for another 3 hours. Do you hold out any hope? Are you optimistic that these idea pathogens can eventually be eradicated and we can return to reason, or is the ship been irrevocably damaged? It has hit the iceberg and it's going down.
Well, I mean, here's one cause for optimism, and then I'll tell you my cause for pessimism. One cause for optimism is that intellectual life, real intellectual life, freedom of thought, freedom of expression, the exploration of maybe very unwelcome ideas is now moving outside the university. And I think the internet, for all of its drawbacks, has been a great boon in this regard, because there are these communities of people who either have not been allowed to enter academia, have been ejected from academia, who are very well educated, who are very thoughtful, mostly male, right? Who are really, they're in think tanks, or they're at publications, or they're on Substack, or, wherever they are, or they form these sort of groups, conversational groups, and they continue to exist because it still is a free country in that sense, and the university can't control absolutely everything. Now, having said that, the universities are powerful, they are rich, people keep throwing money at them, which just drives me berserk, right? You can have these incredibly conservative Princeton alumni, but they're still giving money to Princeton. I say to them, what are you doing? Do you have any idea the cesspool that you are contributing to? But, I make a joke about their little granddaughter, Caitlin. If little Caitlin wants to go to Princeton and little Caitlin gets into Princeton, that's all they care about. Because getting into Princeton and getting out of Princeton is the avenue to the good life. It's the gateway to the upper middle class, right? And it's become more and more important to be in the upper middle class so you can be protected from the hordes and the chaos and the rest of society. And these people, although they're conservative in their views, they just choose to ignore what Caitlin is learning at Princeton, which is that their grandfather is some hideous patriarchal evil capitalist, or whatever the heck he is. So, the universities are doing remarkably well. Now, the second reason I'm pessimistic is because I have seen my students change over even like 10, 15, 20, 30 years. I've been in academia almost 30 years now, and I got a very late start. And they have become these cowed, benighted sheeples. I mean, it's just unbelievable. So not only are they, thoroughly intimidated, as they should be, but they are ignorant. They know nothing. So I'll give you one concrete example. I could give you many. I teach this conservatism course. One of our sessions, or a couple of our sessions, are about race, about disadvantage, and all of those good stuff, and the conservative take on that. And these kids have gone to top colleges, and they've spent 4 years hearing about racism, 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 poverty, bigotry, oppression. That's all they hear about. And I asked them, have you ever heard of the Moynihan Report? Have you ever heard of Daniel Patrick Moynihan? So the Moynihan Report is this really important big report that came out in the mid 60s, I think it was like 65 or something, in which Moynihan said what's happening in the Black family is a catastrophe. It is going to have terrible effects. It has terrible effects now. It's going to have terrible effects down the road. A community in which the men check out, right? Don't marry, don't support families, don't raise their kids, asks for and gets chaos. That is what he said, right? And there was a firestorm. They never heard of it. They never heard of Daniel Patrick Moynihan. They, were born yesterday. I mean,
Larry Elder says this point every single day on his radio show. Thomas Sowell has said it a million times. They're both Black gentlemen, so it doesn't need to be reserved to Moynihan, right?
yeah, no, I mean, there are a million examples of people that they never heard of.
Yeah.
They know nothing. They know nothing about conservative thought, conservative ideas, except for a few who are curious, and they've
Right.
kind of sought it out almost like on their own, right? So never heard of all the mid-century famous conservatives, not even William F. Buckley, Wilmore Kendall, Richard Weaver, James Burnham. That's just not on their map at all. Those ideas are verboten. Even law students, right? You ask them, have you really read anything on originalism, on textualism, on the alternatives to living constitutionalism, which of course their con law courses are a cheering section
Right.
for the latest fad, and no other approach, no other philosophy is really seriously presented. So as a result, when we do a session on it, I'm writing on a blank slate,
Right.
pretty much. So this happens over and over and over again. The syllabus, the curriculum, it's been purged, it's been massaged, it's been propagandized, and that is, that's always been the case to some extent. But when I was at college in the early 70s, I was at Yale. I was in one of the first class of women. I mean, it was a different world, let me tell you.
But so pragmatically, that is likely due to the fact that if you do studies looking at the political affiliation of the professoriate, then you have gigantic lopsided ratios, right? So in most of the quote activist fields, sociology and blank studies and so on, you have ratios of 44 to 1, 130 to 1, if not zero, meaning a ratio of Democrats to Republicans. Now, in some disciplines where you can adjudicate truth using the scientific method, then there's nothing to discuss. The theory of evolution is veridical, and that's it. On the other hand, when it comes to debating whether the pros and cons of the death penalty, there are very valid arguments on both sides of the aisle. But if the students are only exposed to the possibility that one set of arguments exists, that's why they end up as know-nothings, as per your term, right? Because you don't even know of the existence of all of these valuable other comments stemming from this other invisible group. So could it be that, I mean, is there a way for us to institutionalize a greater ideological diversity within how we hire professors, or would that be contrary to a libertarian ethos?
Well, I think the main obstacle, well, first of all, I think you're absolutely right that the lopsided professoriate is a lot of it. Although, frankly, a so-called liberal professor left that when people's politics didn't in the past affect their feeling of obligation to present arguments and points of view across the spectrum. And that happened. I mean, there wasn't this contamination by people's ideology. But the problem, I think, is a very pragmatic one, which is that the university brass, the administration, which is massive of our great universities, plus the professoriate, they are the gatekeepers to who gets hired.
Right.
All right? That they are the arbiters. And they have it within their power to purge the universities of anybody who's right-leaning and prevent anyone from entering, and they are doing it. Harvey Mansfield without apology. Harvey Mansfield just gave an interview on the website Persuasion with Yasha Monk, who I don't entirely trust. But Harvey Mansfield said, do you know that Harvard hasn't hired a conservative in any department, as far as I know, in 15 years, 20 years? And he said, he called that crazy. He said, that's crazy. And here's the other thing, Gad. My husband's a med school professor. There is no more woke, contaminated field today, all right, than medicine and public health.
Incredible, isn't it?
It is incredible. And no dissent allowed. I mean, zero, especially since in medical schools, these elite medical schools, ironically, most people don't have tenure. I mean, there are people who depend on grants, they're dependent on short-term contracts, they have to earn their own way, and they don't dare say a thing. And there are elite departments, let's say oncology, which is a field I know because my relatives are in it, where half or more of the fellows are doing projects in equity, not curing cancer, not cancer biology, not cancer treatment. I mean, Gad, people still die of cancer. That is like
But they die as
on
non-racist.
the Titanic.
But they die as non-racist. That's the most important part.
Well, right. I mean, we still have a heavy lift to develop better treatments for cancer. And, little differences on the margin between groups. If most people are still doing poorly and dying, like, who cares? But it's a complete inversion of where the priorities should be. And here's the thing, part of the reason for it, it's easier.
Yeah.
It's easier to be, a faux sociologist in medicine than to get in there and do the tough, hard, high failure rate work of testing new drugs, coming up with new therapies, getting in the lab and doing basic cancer biology. I mean, that requires a lot of time, a lot of work, and a lot of brain power. And as medicine has become feminized, right? Those priorities have gone by the board
It's
because
amazing.
it's too hard.
Let me ask you one last question, then we could say goodbye offline.
Yeah.
So you're clearly someone who doesn't mince words. You're direct speaker, something that I admire. You are what I call a honey badger. That's a title that you could put on your CV. It's a big accolade to get the honey badger appellation from Dr. Saad. Is there a way that we can? And I'm being serious now, I'm not being facetious. Is there a way to bottle honey badgerism? Or is that something that is a unique combination of your genes that defines you? In other words, Gad Saad was born with the set of genes that makes him irreverent to the orthodoxy and he fights. Amy Wax, or is there something that we can teach people, seminar 1, 2, 3, here's the recipe, that not necessarily will make them natural honey badgers, but at least will move them from the invertebrate, castrated cowards that they are to actually finding a spine to find their voice? Can we do that, or we just have to look for the natural honey badgers and ride them all the way to the courage mountain?
Well, I think the answer is both. I mean, I think some people are more prone to this behavior. I mean, of the big five personality traits, one of them is agreeableness. And, women are more agreeable than men on average. Well, my husband said, agreeableness, you get a 0. So I am not a naturally agreeable person. But, so there are people who are born more unagreeable than others.
Esper, sorry to interrupt you. Esper, when I first reached out to you, you said, I don't do Skype. That's it, period.
Well, I mean, I don't. I'm also a very a Luddite when it comes to technology, so I don't have a smartphone. I mean, the more people tell me I need a smartphone, the more determined I am not to get a smartphone. I mean, there's a little bit of that. There's a little bit of that. But part of it, I'm trying to clear that space of that place of silence in your own mind where you get to think, right? Where you get even to think for yourself and think in a way that's a little more sophisticated than this buzz would encourage you. And that's all I'm really trying to do. I'm trying to clear that place. And, I think more people should do that. But get away from the distraction. But, so there are people who are born with that natural propensity, and we have to, love those people and make sure that, we don't punish them and penalize them, which is what we're doing. But we can foster that. I mean, there's no question.
How do you do that? Just by
Well, first of all, by going back to sort of basic academic commitments and values of a free society, right? Of free thinking, the basic stuff, which, used to have sway and influence, but a generation ago, take the ACLU, right? The ACLU has just abandoned its entire mission. I mean, I remember when I was a kid, my dad said at the dinner table, we're Jews. I'm proud to be in a country where the Nazis can march through Skokie.
Right.
And who says that anymore?
Right.
And what we're not doing is we're not inculcating, and there is a role for inculcation, right? There is a role for fostering a particular set of attitudes, certainly when kids are younger, then eventually they are going to more think for themselves. But we have to expose them to this love of liberty, right? Liberty that beats in your breast, this suspiciousness towards arbitrary concentrations of authority and tyranny is very Anglo-centric. That's our tradition,
Right.
right? That is our American tradition. And there's nothing wrong with it. Those fealties, it's partly feeling, it's partly inspiration, and it's partly intellectual, to admire and love what our civilization has accomplished in terms of the Enlightenment values that have brought us so far, the tolerance for dissent, the even grudging tolerance for people who don't agree with us, which has been virtually completely lost, right, in this kind of miasma of woke priorities, and the turn against absolutism and free speech. You know, this is all very tendentious talk. We need to foster that in young people. And we're not doing that, right? And we're doing quite the opposite. So I think you can take it fairly far with that. That's the way I was brought up, by
Right.
the way. And maybe, you know, probably you were brought up
Yeah.
because we're probably not that different in age. And where did it go? I mean, it vanished. And until we bring back that love of liberty, that Whiggish suspiciousness towards, you know, arbitrary authority and tyranny, we will not make any progress. And, you know, that doesn't mean you don't also value tradition. It's a balance. It's a very sophisticated balance, actually, to respect the past, which of course the past has brought us much of this, to embrace self-improvement and progressivism up to a point, because that's the American way, but not unrealistic, you know, wild-eyed social engineering that seeks to just totally transform human nature and, you know, just purge every element of fealty to family, to tradition, to older ways of doing things, to stability, to sameness, to familiarity. You know, all of the stuff that's now been denigrated. I'm not sure why that all went away among elites. It doesn't among the rest of the population. The rest of the population retains some of it, but they feel very disempowered. They feel very, very powerless, which is partly why, you know, people went for Trump, I think.
Right. Well,
Because
I was just going to add that I mean, to end it on a hope, on a message of hope. I think that the silent majority despises a lot of the woke pathogens, as per the number that write to me, but then say at the end of the email, please don't mention my name if
oh,
you
right.
right. So I think that if there's a way for us to ignite the courage in people to not diffuse the responsibility for a few to speak on everyone's behalf, I think we'll be able to redress the ship pretty quickly. I mean, it seems dire, but the reality is that the numbers are truly in our favor. Most people don't like the stuff. I think the blue-haired people are very committed ideologically. So people overestimate the number of people who are holding the rest of us hostage. But the
Yes,
reality is
but
that
they have power.
they
They
have
have
power, exactly.
tremendous power out of
True.
proportion to their numbers. And they are not about to let it go. In fact, they are doubling and tripling down on it. And I mean, you know, my case is on some level not about me, because I'm just roadkill. I'm a casualty, you know, in the culture wars. But what I see being said and done with respect to me is truly alarming. I mean, it is a total repudiation of the very concept of academic freedom
Yeah.
that is happening. Here's what my case boils down to. We don't approve of her opinions and positions. Therefore, she has to be punished.
Yeah.
That's it. That's all you need to say about it. I mean, and the rest of it is just woke-a-babble. You know, it's bullshit. You know, once that happens, that is an alarming development.
I hear you. Well, Dr. Wax, what a pleasure to meet you. Thank you so much for agreeing to be on the show. Stay on the line so we could say goodbye officially offline. Guys, if you appreciate this show and all the conversations that I have, please consider supporting the show in any way that you can. Thank you so much, Amy. True pleasure to meet you.
Sure.